Narrator. The palace's dark history started almost immediately. King Henry VIII graced his cardinal's humble new abode with his presence pretty much right after it was finished in 1525. As was befitting a king of England, Henry stayed in the state apartments at Hampton Court, which were basically the penthouse suites of the Tudor era. As it turns out, inviting the king to stay was a fatal mistake. Wolsey got precious little time to enjoy his new digs. Shortly after Henry's visit to the palace, the cardinal fell from the monarch's favor. Desperate to appease the bloodthirsty king and knowing that Henry VIII had liked his stay, Wolsey gifted Hampton Court to him around 1529, but even that wasn't enough. Henry VIII snatched up the palace instantly. It would, after all, become his favorite residence. Then he betrayed Wolsey in spectacular fashion. Perhaps never intending to restore Wolsey to favor, Henry cut the cardinal out of his life, and the holy man died just 2 years later. The palace's first curse was complete, but this was just the beginning. In order to accommodate his enormous court at Hampton, Henry built a whole block of medieval toilets he called the Great House of Easement down by the river. When it was still standing, it could fit 14 people at a time. Meanwhile, Henry got his own private loo, a throne covered in sheepskin, black velvet, and ribbons. Henry VIII's second wife, the bewitching Anne Boleyn, is tragically linked to Hampton Court. When Anne was still alive and in good health, Henry constructed lavish apartments for his queen at the palace. Or, well, he almost did. In yet another palace curse, Boleyn faced the chopping block before construction was finished, but that's not the last we'll see of Anne. In 1537, joy finally came to Hampton Court Palace, sort of. That year, Henry VIII's third queen, Jane Seymour, became pregnant with the king's child. Henry desperately wanted a son, so he was overjoyed when Seymour gave birth to a healthy baby boy, the future King Edward VI, but tragedy was just around the corner. Jane Seymour had an incredibly difficult time with pregnancy, and had miscarried a child before bringing Edward to term, but her labor with the new prince was a terrible ordeal. The baby was likely in a breech position, and the painful labor lasted a grueling 3 nights. Henry's response to the dangerous labor was truly disturbing. When doctors informed Henry of how badly his wife was doing, the king's response was utterly ruthless. He made it clear that if it came down to the baby or Jane, he knew exactly who should be saved. The monarch reportedly told the doctors, "If you cannot save both, at least let the child live, for other wives are easily found." Well, let's just say he got what he asked for. On October 24, 1537, just weeks after the birth of her son, Jane Seymour passed at Hampton Court Palace. Debate rages to this day about the cause of her death, with some historians speculating about a retained placenta, bacterial infection, or even a pulmonary embolism. One thing is certain, Queen Jane's death was not a good way to go. Despite his mercenary comment to the doctors, Henry was devastated at Jane's passing. He wore black for months afterward, even as he courted his next queen, Anne of Cleves. Historians believe Jane was his favorite wife because she gave him a son. But the drama did not stop there. Hampton Court would be the setting of more Tudor tragedies. Henry annulled his marriage to Anne of Cleves after just 6 months on January 9, 1540. Now a free agent, he wasted no time making it official with the young and bewitching Catherine Howard. The pair married a scandalous 19 days after his annulment, and used Hampton Court to make the announcement official. And if that wasn't enough drama, while King Henry VIII's fourth wife, Anne of Cleves, shockingly left Hampton Court with her head and a place in court, his fifth wife, Catherine Howard, would not be as lucky. Howard actually started as one of Anne's ladies-in-waiting. She met Henry at court while serving Anne of Cleves. That was when Henry and Catherine began an illicit romance, but karma was waiting for the young queen. In public, Anne of Cleves didn't seem to resent her old lady-in-waiting Catherine Howard at all, and even visited Hampton Court Palace for one Christmas and gifted the couple some horses. In return, Catherine gave her ex-boss a ring and 2 puppies as Christmas gifts, and the two danced together in the great hall at the palace. Anne of Cleves was wise enough to know not to get on Henry's bad side. Catherine should have been taking notes. Although she was now married to Henry, Catherine was hiding a scandalous secret. While she was still a lady-in-waiting for Anne of Cleves, Catherine was courted by a favorite of the king, Thomas Culpeper. When she became queen, her relationship with Culpeper didn't stop, and the pair had secret meetings all over Henry's many palaces. This would be Catherine's downfall. Hearing rumors of the affair, the king gave investigators permission to rip apart Culpeper's chambers. What they found was the final nail in the coffin. They uncovered a letter from Howard to Thomas Culpeper, written in her distinct handwriting, but it wasn't just any old letter. Its contents all but buried her. In the fateful letter, Catherine reveals that her heart belongs to Culpeper, not Henry. As she wrote, "When I think that you shall depart from me again, it makes my heart die to think what fortune I have, that I cannot be always in your company." She signed the letter, "Yours as long as life endures." That life would not endure very long at all. When King Henry learned of Catherine's dalliance with Thomas Culpeper, he did not take it lying down. His deranged response is impossible to forget. Henry reportedly flew into a rage and called for a sword so he could kill his wife himself right then and there. Obviously, he eventually decided to outsource his wife's execution. Henry used Hampton Court to try to win the breakup with Catherine Howard. Although it's very likely that he already knew about Catherine's treason, Henry also conveniently arranged to be praying in Hampton Court's chapel when the official warrant for her arrest came down. That way, he looked extra good and merciful as he signed away his wife's life. According to one story, Queen Catherine's arrest couldn't have been more horrific. Apparently, she briefly escaped her captivity and ran to where King Henry was hearing Mass, again, in Hampton Court's chapel, before she could make it to the door and beg for her life. The young queen was dragged back to her apartments, kicking and screaming all the way. The tale of Catherine Howard's desperate escape and attempt to plead for her life is now one of the most famous ghost stories in royal history. If you go to Hampton Court Palace, they say you can catch a glimpse of a screaming lady in white rushing down the haunted gallery. That would be Catherine's ghost, trying and failing to save herself once more from the chopping block. Folklore says that Catherine's last words as she went to the block were, "I die a queen, but I would rather have died the wife of Culpeper." This is a myth. Her real final words were even more heartbreaking. Howard was repentant, crying that she deserved to die 1,000 deaths for betraying a king who always treated her so graciously. The people of King Henry's court had to dress to the nines every time they saw the king. Although it was an outward display of their wealth, being on the cutting edge of fashion could also help courtiers in other ways. The better you dressed at functions, the more likely you were to get past the men guarding Henry's most private rooms. Tudor monarchs frequently moved from palace to palace. This wasn't just because they could, it was also out of a disgusting necessity. After the mass of courtiers had a few gut-busting feasts, the castle's sewage systems got very backed up. Moving the court gave servants the necessary time to clean the trashed, vacated palace. Hampton Court saw one more queen before Henry's reign ended, his last wife, Catherine Parr. The royal pair even married at the palace on July 12, 1543. Parr was intelligent, well-traveled, and she also managed to outlive her volatile husband. But while Henry passed in 1547, Hampton Court wasn't done with the Tudor monarchs and their tragedies. When Henry's eldest daughter, Mary, became Queen of England, she followed in her father's gruesome footsteps. A staunch Catholic, the Queen's persecution and burning of Protestants earned her the nickname Bloody Mary. But few people know about the personal terrors the Queen experienced inside Hampton Court. Queen Mary adored Hampton Court Palace at first. After all, she and her husband, King Philip of Spain, spent their honeymoon inside Hampton's red brick walls, getting right down to the royal business the British people expected of them. Unfortunately for Mary, the business of producing an heir is where it all went very wrong. Sometime after the royal couple's honeymoon, Mary found herself pregnant with her first child. Overjoyed, she chose to have the baby at Hampton Court. Since it was likely conceived there, it seemed like a good omen to bring the heir into the world there. The Queen posted up at the palace for 5 months, but she soon realized the horrific truth. As it turned out, Mary was afflicted with a bizarre phantom pregnancy, the first of 2 she would have in her life. All the signs were there. She'd missed her period, gained weight, and even felt nauseated in the mornings, but there was simply no baby. After months of awaiting the birth of her child, Mary finally had to concede to her utter disappointment. Her womb was empty. She was not pregnant at all. Maybe Queen Mary's relationship with Hampton Court started to sour after her false pregnancy, because she also used the palace for a cruel personal vendetta. She imprisoned her own sister there. Princess Elizabeth, later Queen Elizabeth I, was a threat to Mary's rule, and the Queen kept the girl under various house arrests around Britain, including at Hampton Court. It wasn't all doom and gloom at the palace, though. Hampton Court was also a place of great learning. In 1604, King James I, Elizabeth I's successor, held his famous Hampton Court Conference to try to come to an agreement with the country's angry Puritans. This meeting led to a little thing you might have heard of, the King James Bible. In the 17th century, Hampton Court was the setting of yet another ill-fated honeymoon. But while Queen Mary got off lightly with just a phantom pregnancy, King Charles I and his teenage bride, Henrietta Maria, had even worse luck. Although they spent a lavish honeymoon at the palace, their fates would be some of the darkest in all of British history. Charles I believed in the divine right of kings, an outmoded way of thinking even for the time. In short, Charles thought the King of England should have absolute divine power. This did not work out well for him. In 1649, the English Parliament arrested Charles for high treason, forcing his now impoverished wife to flee. In one fell swoop, Hampton Court turned from Charles' palace to his prison. Charles' sergeant still had a lot of fight in him, and one day he made an escape through Hampton Court's magnificent privy garden. It was a valiant effort, but sadly it failed miserably. Parliamentary leader Oliver Cromwell caught him and soon finished the job. Charles was beheaded, the first and only English king to meet that terrible fate. The short-lived English Commonwealth after Charles I's unprecedented beheading is one of the more bizarre eras in British history. But Hampton Court's role in this period is just as strange. While people at the time went around destroying royal castle after royal castle in the name of democracy, Hampton Court still stood. Why? Oliver Cromwell liked it so much, he made it his home. When Charles I's son, King Charles II, found his way back to the English throne and reinstated the monarchy, it's safe to say he did not learn from his forebears. No, he didn't end up getting beheaded like his dearly departed father, but he did decide to honeymoon with his wife, Catherine of Braganza, at Hampton Court. The king soon found the palace's curse alive and well. Charles II's relationship with Catherine of Braganza was notoriously dysfunctional, mostly because Charles was head over heels for another woman, his ballsy, busty mistress Barbara Palmer, who was so powerful, people called her the uncrowned queen. And this queen used Hampton Court to make a scandalous statement. By 1662, Barbara had way more influence than King Charles II's wife, Catherine of Braganza, and she made her feel it in the cruelest way possible, while pregnant with the king's second illegitimate child. During the king and queen's honeymoon, Barbara sailed on up to Hampton Court to meet them. Then, in an insane power move, she actually had the baby there. In Hampton Court's later years under King William III and his Queen Mary, the royal residence underwent a major makeover. William wanted the palace to rival the spectacle of Versailles in France and employed the famed architect Christopher Wren to help him. Accordingly, he tore down a good chunk of King Henry VIII's architecture. Wren began to replace it with a more Baroque facade and then suddenly stopped. After Queen Mary passed, King William lost interest in their royal pet project and mostly ceased construction. If he ever intended to take it up again, he never got the chance to. One day, while out riding the grounds of Hampton Court, William fell from his horse, later succumbing to his injuries in Kensington Palace. After King William III's passing, Hampton Court seemed to lose some of its luster, or maybe monarchs were finally catching on to the fact that the Pleasure Palace had a dark and possibly cursed vibe. Either way, King George II was the last ruler to ever reside at Hampton Court, but that doesn't mean it stayed empty. Although the royals abandoned Hampton Court in the 1700s, so-called grace and favor residents moved in to replace them. These were impoverished aristocrats who took up the apartments rent-free in exchange for their services to the crown. But if that sounds posh and glamorous to you, it really wasn't. These faded nobles lived in quiet desperation a lot of the time until living there turned into a full-blown nightmare. In 1986, the widowed Lady Daphne Gale was staying in one of the Grace and Favor apartments. When she started a massive fire, the blaze was so wild it even spread to the old king's apartments. Responders rushed to the scene, but they were too late. Hampton Court itself was salvageable, but tragically, Lady Gale had lost her life. Today, the Grace and Favor residents aren't just a dying breed. They're completely gone. The Crown stopped accepting applicants in the 1980s, although they allowed any current residents to stay where they were. The ghost of Queen Catherine Howard may not be the only specter that haunts Hampton Court. People have also claimed to see the ghost of Henry's beloved wife, Jane Seymour, on the Silver Stick Stairs near where the ill-fated Queen gave birth. Edward VI's wet nurse, Sybil Penn, is reportedly the Grey Lady who also roams the palace's halls. Secret signs of the palace's tragic Tudor history are literally part of the walls of Hampton Court. Anne Boleyn may have met a tragic fate, but Hampton Court still holds traces of her hopeful beginnings. Although Henry tried to have all portraits of Anne and references to Anne destroyed after her execution, if you look up in the carved arches of Hampton Court's Great Hall, you can still see the initials A and H intertwined. This detail was left over from when Henry was building up the palace for his second bride. That wraps up this journey. Thanks for watching Splash Travels. Like and subscribe to uncover more of the world's best-kept secrets. And don't forget to dive into more fascinating facts on our main page, Factinate.